In this video, we're going to cover how to do the initial configuration on a Palo Alto firewall. Basically, if we get a Palo Alto firewall out of the box or our virtual machine fired up for the very first time, how do we give it an IP address? How do we connect to it? How do we start configuring it? And how do we make it start working? Well, in this particular scenario, we've got this guy right here, this network right here. We have our Palo Alto firewall in the middle, and we have a couple of different networks. Over here we have a private VLAN. This would be, say, all the desktops or the servers in your environment. We also have a public VLAN. This guy would be the internet. And then we have what's called a DMZ, or a demilitarized zone VLAN right here. The goal of a DMZ is basically it's halfway between your private network and your public network, so that the people from the public can access the DMZ, the people on the DMZ can access private if necessary. However, public cannot go all the way into the private. The final network we have here is the one that we're actually most interested in this video, is the management network. Now, a management network is actually a pretty common thing you'll have in an environment, is you'll set up a network that's specifically for management. There's no end users on it, there's no servers on it, there's no public internet or anything like that. It's basically you'll have a management workstation, such as this, and it has a dedicated connection to all of your firewalls, all of your servers, all of your network switches, SANs, and so on. And that management network is there so that if all the other networks get messed up somehow, you still have communications into your network device in order to configure them and save them from whatever problems are occurring. So this is what we're looking for in this particular video, is how do we configure this interface right here on this firewall so that we can then do further configurations in the future. Well, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. The first one is, well, as we're showing right here, there is actually a management port on the Palo Alto firewalls. Oftentimes, this is a specific Ethernet port all by itself. It has the words NGMT written next to it. What you do is you just plug a Cat5 or Cat6 Ethernet cable into that port, and once you have an IP address on it, you can just go ahead and manage it using your management workstation. The other alternative is to use a console cable. And so if you have a serial cable from your PC right here, there is also a console serial cable port on the Palo Alto firewall that you can use in order to configure the system directly. Standard serial cable, this is exactly what you would see with most every other network device out there. I believe it's 9600 baud, 8N1, pretty much any terminal emulator would be able to work that for you. When you log in, you have some defaults. For instance, this guy right here, the default username and password is admin and admin. Additionally, when you go ahead and log into that guy and you start configuring the management interface, a couple of gotchas that follow along with every other network device out there. First off, you can't have IP conflicts. If an IP address is already assigned, or sorry, if a device is already assigned to the IP address you're looking for, you can't assign it to that device. And you have to set up routing and DNS and everything else for the system to be able to access the internet. Why would we want that to access the internet? Actually, before we get into it, why would I want my management network? Why would I want that to access the internet? Well, the management network is actually used for quite a few things beyond just me on this device managing my firewall. The management network is used for updates. Maybe there's antivirus updates. Or maybe there's other firewall rules that I need to update, such as which sites should be allowed and which sites shouldn't be allowed. Maybe I need to do DNS requests or some sort of an LDAP query. All of these protocols, all of these technologies, by default, utilize the management interface in order to get out to the internet, in order to see where and what these settings should be. Oops. I did not want to cancel that. There we go. So in this network, we have these guys right here. This is our interfaces. There were the 4 networks: the management, private, TMZ, and public. In this particular scenario, we are only concerned with the management interface. It's already written, or the IP addresses I've written out here, so I know exactly what they're going to be so that we can go ahead and configure them. So we have the IP address, net mask, and gateway for our management interface. First time you have to configure a system, you may have to go in and configure it via command line. By default, if you have a physical Palo Alto system, it has no IP address on the management interface. If you get a system that is a virtual device, such as what we're using here in this class, these guys by default utilize DHCP, and so we have to utilize, or we have to turn off DHCP for this to be able to work. So like I already said, the default password and username and password for these devices is admin/admin. In this lab, we are using admin/password01. Never use password01 in the real world. I'm only using it here because I can delete the machine immediately as soon as I'm done with it. The Palo Alto command line has tab completion and context-sensitive help. Tab completion, basically you start typing one of these words, like right here it says device config, it's supposed to be a G. If I just start typing dev and then hit tab, it will finalize the whole device config command for me. Tab completion makes life a whole lot simpler. And then context sensitive help, well, this is how you type the question mark, and it will just spit back with whatever else is necessary for your command to succeed. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at this and see how it works. I've got a Palo Alto virtual machine here. Let me zoom on in. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter one time just to get to the login page. My login is admin and password 01. It's going to go ahead and tell me, or log me in. First thing I need to do is I need to type in the configure command. Configure command puts me into configuration mode, oddly enough. You have to be a little careful here. If you're used to Cisco devices, you're used to it saying specifically configure to tell you you're in configure mode. The only difference here is, in fact, don't know why my, all right, well, the only difference here, as you can see, is up here where it says configure, to the left of configure, I have a greater than symbol. However, after I typed configure, it changed into a pound sign. Pound sign means I'm in configuration mode. So now that I'm in configuration mode, the first thing I need to do is I need to exit out of DHCP. So this system, because it is a virtual machine, defaults to a DHCP configuration. So I need to turn off DHCP and see that it is, or in order to make it static. I can actually confirm this. Let's see, show device config, no. Show interface. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. I am in configuration mode. There we go. Show. That's what I was looking for. Show interface. Again, question mark. And I'm specifically looking for management. And here I can see this is my management interface. And I do have an IP address currently, and it is configured via DHCP. So I need to turn it off with DHCP, and then we would be able, and then set an IP address. So back into configure mode. So first thing to turn off DHCP is set device config. Tab complete. It's helpful. System. Type is static. So I've gone ahead, I've turned off the DHCP. I'm telling you I want it to use a static IP address. Next step is to actually give it the IP address I want it to use. So set device config system IP dash address. My IP address I want it to use is 172.31.199.60 and net mask 255.255.00. I hit enter. And one thing we need to pay attention to here is if you're used to Cisco devices, at this point, this guy has a new IP address. However, this is not a Cisco device. What we've done is we have staged a pending configuration. We've created a staged or pending or soon to be configuration. However, we have not actually committed that configuration. So what we need to do is we need to commit this configuration. And I know you're thinking, how do we commit a configuration? And you're somebody out there screaming, you type in commit. Probably. Yes, you type in commit. Depending on the speed of the system, this will be really, really fast or it will be really, really slow. Here on these virtual machines, it is moderate. I've gone ahead and I've committed the configuration. Now I can exit out of configuration mode. And then if I simply up arrow and find my show command again, show interface management, I now see that my IP address is 172.31.199.60, exactly as I had told it to be. All right, so now that I've gone ahead and done that, right here you can see are the commands I ran. Configure. I've turned off DHCP, and then I gave it a specific IP address and ran the commit command in order to commit it. At this point, I now have an IP address on this device, and I can start utilizing it specifically to fetch the configuration. And that's where the Palo Alto web interface comes in. Here we can just go ahead and browse to that IP address and start configuring the rest of the system. So here I have a machine. Let's go ahead and open up a web browser. And I'll go ahead and type in the IP address that I just typed in, https://172.31.99.60. And it will take a few things here. First off, it will be a little bit slow the very first time we log in. $199. There we go. We'll get a warning message saying that it's trying to use an SSL certificate, but there is a problem with it. That's perfectly understandable. This is a brand new machine. It's using a self-signed certificate. We would expect this to happen. Continue the website. And then we can go ahead and log in. Again, admin, password 01. Very first time it loads up, it takes a few seconds to get me to a screen, which again is perfectly normal. And when we get to this screen, it will look extremely busy and you'll be wondering what all's going on. It will eventually start to make sense to you and everything will start flowing and be understandable for how the system works. There we go, it's starting to load up. First item over here on the left-hand side, we have this general information. The general information here contains, well, again, general information. For instance, right here we can see the management IP address. So what IP address do we connect to in order to configure this guy? Same thing with its net mask and gateway. This section right here will actually give you quite a bit of information about your device. If you ever have to license it or do anything with support, this is where you'll start looking for like the support mode and so on. We're specifically looking to see where we can configure the IP addresses, doing exactly what we just did, except through the GUI, through the web GUI. What we need to do is we need to click up here on this tab called Device. We're going to go to Device, and then on the Device tab, we're going to click Setup over here on the left-hand side. We already went to Setup, so we don't have to worry about that. And then into the Management sub-tab, and then over here, Management sub-tab and Management Interface. Where is Management Interface? Interfaces. Interfaces, Management. There we go. And this is where we would, again, configure our IP address. We can see it already has the IP address here. If we wanted to change it again, we could change it through here. And then commit those changes as necessary. Same thing with the net mask. In this case, the default gateway was already set because it took that from our DHCP configuration. We didn't configure that through the CLI. So if you're getting a hardware device, this is where you would set that there as well. Same thing with IPv6 and so on. Since we're here, let's go ahead and configure the other items we'll need in order to access the internet, which is DNS. For DNS, same basic thing, device tab, setup. In this case, we then go over here to services, the services sub-tab, and then there is a services section right here. We're gonna go ahead and click the gear icon, and it asks us what kind of DNS do we want, and we can type in our DNS servers here. Again, these DNS servers are here simply because they were stolen from, copied from the DHCP configuration. If we wanted to change them, we would change them here. I'm actually going to change this to 8888 and 8844. While we're here, there is this service features and service route configuration. If I click on this, you'll see that it says use the management interface for everything. Remember I said this is why we need the management interface in order to access the internet. It's because there's lots of different things that might need access to the internet or other services. We can actually click customize here and change which interfaces the different services use. For instance, if I want this system to send an email, but I don't want it to send it through the management interface, I want it to send it, maybe it can't access my email server through the management interface. So I can then change the email management interface to something else. I can't change it here, can't change it right now because I don't have any other interfaces configured. That's why there's no, there we go. There's no other interfaces listed because I don't have any of them configured. But I could actually change those right there. This can be useful, for instance, multi-factor authentication. Maybe I'm doing some sort of an authentication that needs access to my domain controller. How do I contact my domain controller? Well, I come in here and I tell it which interface the domain controller is communicating. All right, I'm gonna cancel that because I don't want any of those to stay. And then last but not least, I've gone ahead, I've made changes here through the web interface. Specifically, I've changed my DNS servers. How do I make it so that those changes stick? Well, when we were on the command line, we typed the commit command. Here we actually have a commit button. So I've gone ahead, I made the changes in the web interface. I can go ahead and click commit, commit all changes, and commit button down here. Goes ahead, it makes those pending changes live, commits them into production, and success. All right, so that's working with the Palo Alto web interface. Last but not least, now that we've gone ahead and we've configured the IP, we've configured DNS, we've configured gateway, how do we make sure all of this is working? That's probably the most important part is we've made a change. How do we know it's actually doing what it was supposed to do? Well, from the command line, we can test it. So let's go ahead and get back into the command line here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to ping Google. There's a couple of different ways you can ping Google. The first one I'm going to do right here, as you can see, is ping 8.8.8.8. That's an IP address for Google. It's really easy to remember. That's why I always use it. The command's a little different than what you're normally used to with Windows or Linux or even Cisco devices. Ping host 8.8.8.8. And we can see it is making its way through. This will keep going until I stop it. I stop it with Control-C on my keyboard. So what that does is that tells me my IP address is valid. I'm not conflicting with anybody else. My default gateway is working, and I have routing out to the internet. So it tells me all of my TCP/IP stack is working properly. Next thing I want to do is I want to try to ping a host name in order to confirm DNS is working. So I'm going to do the same thing. Ping host. Instead of an IP address, I'm going to type google.com. And so now it tries to ping google.com, which resolves to some weird IP address that changes every time I do it. But that's fine. The name was resolved to an IP address, which tells me now DNS is working. Going to go ahead and Control-C that to cancel out of it. And so we just confirmed that our IP for their management interface is working, and DNS is working, and everything is routing to the internet.